This is going to be part 2 of my 3-part video review of the Marlondo Double Space Briefcase compared to the Saddleback Classic Briefcase. This part of the review is going to focus on the interior of the two bags. If you haven't seen my first part, or if you're just interested in Marlondo's bag review by itself without a comparison to Saddleback, please refer to my other videos. So looking on the inside of the bag, we'll start with basically the lining that appears on the bag. So Marlondo itself chooses to make the design choice to use pigskin lining along the inside of the bag. Very similar to what Saddleback does. However, compared to Saddleback, Marlondo uses a very different type of lining. They use something that Saddleback has used previously. They used a black slick pigskin. This one is actually more of a brown pigskin. So very similar design choice. You can see all the rivets going all the way through, as well as the stitching itself. So it gives you a nice little kind of behind the scenes view of the stitching and the amount of craftsmanship that goes into place in designing and creating this bag. The Marlondo bag itself, along the interior in the back pocket, has one large pocket with pencil holders for it, or pen holders, and then along the front pocket has a second set of pockets here, which are slightly larger, one wider than the other, with a flap that secures shut on one side and one without a flap. It has two smaller, these interior smaller pockets here that some people use to hold, you know, random knickknacks that may slide around. I use it for extra pens that I have. Sometimes I carry a flashlight around in there, and then also for business cards. So I find it very helpful. A couple things that Marlondo does extremely well that I really enjoy in terms of their bag design is this securable flap along the inside of this first pocket here. And the reason I really enjoy this flap being in place is because flap is a little difficult to get in place right now. It's relatively new, but once it's in place, it's secured really well and it's easy to pop out and use. The other thing I like is these interior pockets, the smaller ones, are actually lined with pigskin. This is made of tougher material. This pigskin leather is not gonna tear on you, is not going to get scarred on you, it's not going to get scratched on you, which means that you don't have to worry as much shoving things in here and being a little rough with these two pockets. In terms of interior design, the other thing that Marlondo keeps that Saddleback also had is the little key leash. So you can attach your keys here, especially if you're traveling. You could just throw an extra pair of keys onto here and put it in place. Marlondo does one thing very well, and it's utilization of potential negative space. And it's something that, in terms of bags, people don't talk about a lot, but I think is actually incredibly important. And what I mean by that is, if I just flip this bag over and let it sit naturally, what you see is in this front pocket, a lot of potential space in here, a lot of negative space, which means that when you go to throw things in your bag, you will naturally go to whatever pocket is more empty, and you will likely start throwing bigger things into your front pocket. Saddleback, on the other hand, doesn't have that potential negative space. That space is all taken up by the pockets, as you can see here. What that means is you get a false impression that the front pocket is full when it may not be full, because you have pockets that occupy that negative space and you lose out on some of it. Saddleback uses this pigskin lining that I really like as well. Very smooth, easy to use. They have a bar across the middle, as I mentioned in my other review, that's not present in the Marlondo. Marlondo uses a leather strap sewn in place. Saddleback has a bar. You can see stitching that goes through. You can also see rivets that are in place as well. Saddleback, along the bottom here, just uses pigskin lining on both sides and has this kind of false bottom that you can flip over to hide stuff in. If you ever want to hide anything, make sure no one can find it. On the front pocket here, they have these two bigger pockets and then two side pockets here for you to utilize and throw things into. I will say that the Saddleback pockets lined with leather feel great, but it makes you nervous throwing things in here because you're always worried you're going to scratch the leather, and it's nice to not have to worry about that with the Marlondo. The other thing that the Marlondo does that Saddleback does not do, and I think depending on who you are and what you think about it, is either a negative or a positive, is that the back of the bottom of the pockets actually have 3 separate pieces of leather. I told you that gusset on the outside has 3 separate pieces. So the very bottom leather piece is actually lined with pigskin on the back pocket, as well as this front pocket here, which means that it makes you just that much more comfortable throwing things in. But Marlondo does omit one piece that I find to be fairly important. Along the middle divider along the back, there's no pigskin lining here, which I find kind of an interesting choice because they line everything, including this bottom here with pigskin, making it tough, but then they neglect to put anything behind this line. So I find it interesting mostly because everything else in this bag is made to be so tough that you can throw things in without ever having to worry about causing significant damage to the leather, but then they don't line one very large piece of leather along the back. If I was Marlondo and I had to do this bag, I may consider doing that, but that is their prerogative, their option. One thing you do get if you don't line this pigskin is a little bit more of a flexible divider rather than a stiffer divider that you get here, which is part of that quality comes from the pigskin itself. Otherwise, interior dimension and space between these two bags are very, very comparable. I will say that the Marlondo really does win out on the design aspect of it. They choose to do things a little bit differently. The addition of the pen holders is a huge help. Anyone who's owned a Saddleback or similar bag can tell you pens in these types of bags can be a huge pain. And they can be a huge pain because there's really not a great place to place them. If you put them along those side pockets on the interior, that's fine, but then you lose out on a whole pocket to put things in. And having an extra area just for pens is super helpful. I really, really like it. I also like the secured pocket that you could put the flap over inside the Marlondo as well. That is so helpful when you have the tiny little knickknacks, just random like USB drives and things sitting in a pocket. If your bag, for example, gets knocked over onto the ground, it won't fall out of that pocket with the lid secure. While with the Saddleback, sometimes it does, and sometimes you find it rolling around inside your bag, and you get a little bit nervous that if you hadn't noticed that, maybe what would have happened is it could have just fallen out of your bag and you would have never known. So I really like that design choice in Marlondo's. It's kind of personal preference what you like in terms of the interior lining. Marlondo's bag, I will say, I'm not totally sold on not using a piece of metal here to kind of hold and reinforce that bag, but time will tell whether or not that was the correct design choice and whether or not that was really needed on the Saddleback. But that is something that Marlondo does not do, that Saddleback does do. So they made a choice not to include that. I'm not really privy to their design choices or why they made that decision, but it is something that is interesting, something that differs between the two bags. Otherwise, the interior of the bags are both very functional. It just depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a pocket that secures with a flap and pencil holders, as well as the multitude of pockets of different sizes that Saddleback has, Marlondo gives you that plus the 2 extras, the pen holders and the securable flap that Saddleback does not. People actually pay leather workers to add flaps onto their bags a lot of times in the Saddleback communities of people who really love Saddleback. So it's nice that Marlondo just gives that to you up front without having you to go find someone and make that for you. So this is my second part of my video review of the Marlondo Classic Double Space Briefcase compared to the Saddleback Classic Briefcase. Stay tuned for my third part of this review with final conclusions.